Number 1. Antonio Reyes. In Chicago, 2025, a teenager named Antonio Reyes shocked the city with crimes that police and prosecutors described as random acts of murder. At just 17 years old, Reyes was accused of being one of the youngest serial killers in the city's history. Antonio Reyes was not known for having a big criminal record before this. He was a teenager living in Chicago's neighborhoods, but what investigators uncovered showed a dark side. According to police, Reyes was not killing for money or gang retaliation. His victims were random. That made his crimes even scarier, because anyone could be his next target. The killings happened in late 2024 and early 2025. Chicago police said Reyes targeted different people across the city. His first known victim was a father walking home with his children. The man was shot and killed without warning. The children survived, but they watched their father die on the street. That killing shocked residents, but at the time nobody knew it was part of something larger. Not long after, another man was murdered while stopping at a gas station. Witnesses said there was no argument, no robbery, and no warning. He was simply shot dead. Weeks later, a UPS delivery driver was also killed in the middle of his work shift. The murders had no clear link, but the style of the killings, sudden, cold, and random, made detectives begin to suspect a single person was behind them. Investigators used surveillance footage, shell casings, and tips from the community to trace the murders back to Reyes. The discovery stunned the city. He was only 17 years old, but prosecutors said he acted with the cold calculation of an adult. What made the case even worse was what happened after Reyes was caught. While being held in juvenile detention, prosecutors said he continued to plan violence. He allegedly used other teens inside the facility to send messages and arrange for more shootings outside. Even behind bars, he wanted to cause chaos. Authorities called it proof that he was not just a kid making bad choices, but someone who had chosen to embrace a life of violence. The community response was a mix of anger, fear, and sadness. Chicago has long struggled with gun violence, but this case stood out. It wasn't tied to gang wars or drug deals. Instead, it showed how a single teenager, acting on his own, could terrorize an entire city. Prosecutors charged Reyes as an adult, meaning he faces life in prison if convicted. In court, they described him as a serial killer in the making, saying he killed for no reason other than the thrill of it. Defense lawyers argued he was still a child, influenced by a rough environment, and possibly suffering from mental illness. But for the families of his victims, those explanations meant little. Their loved ones were gone forever. The story of Antonio Reyes raises hard questions. How does someone so young turn into a cold-blooded killer? Could anything have stopped him before the first murder? Some community leaders say it shows the need for stronger programs for at-risk youth, while others point to the easy availability of guns in Chicago. For the victims' families, the answers don't matter as much as the loss they feel. A father who never came home, a man who never finished his stop at the gas station, a delivery worker who never returned from his route. Ordinary people, killed by a teenager who decided to play God with their lives. As of now, Antonio Reyes waits for trial. If convicted, he could spend the rest of his life behind bars. At only 17 years old, he may never walk free again. His story is one of the darkest examples of teenage violence in Chicago's history, and a reminder of how unpredictable and deadly human cruelty can be, even when it comes from someone who is still legally a child. Number 2. Rankins and Tykeece Johnson. In the fall of 1994, Chicago was shaken by one of the most disturbing crimes in its history. The killers were not grown men or even teenagers. They were children. Jesse Rankins, age 10, and Tykeece Johnson, age 11, committed a crime so shocking that it made headlines across the country. Their victim was Eric Morse, a 5-year-old boy. Eric lived with his mother in the Ida B. Wells public housing project, a place already known for poverty, gangs, and violence. But no one could imagine that a child so young would become the target of a deadly attack. The story began when Eric and his brother, Derek, were playing in the building. Jesse and Tykeece wanted Eric to help them steal candy from a store. When Eric refused, they decided to punish him. This was not just bullying. It turned into murder. On October 13, 1994, Jesse and Tykeece lured Eric and his brother to a 14th floor apartment. They trapped the boys inside and began to beat them. Eric's older brother managed to escape, running to get help. But Eric was not so lucky. Witnesses later testified that Jesse and Tykeece pushed the small boy toward the window. Eric begged them to stop, crying and screaming. Instead, the two boys lifted him up and dropped him out of the window. Eric fell 14 stories to his death. The crime horrified Chicago. Newspapers called it proof of lost childhoods, showing how violence had consumed even the youngest members of the community. Mayor Richard Daley said at the time, "When you have 10 and 11-year-old kids killing a 5-year-old, something is wrong in our society." Both Jesse and Tykeece were arrested quickly. They admitted to what they had done, though they seemed not to fully grasp the seriousness of their crime. Because of their age, they could not be tried as adults, but they were among the youngest people ever convicted of murder in Illinois. In 1995, a juvenile court judge sentenced them to serve time until they turned 21. The case raised a storm of debate. Many people asked, how could children so young commit such a brutal act? Some argued that the environment of the housing projects, where gangs, drugs, and violence were everywhere, had poisoned their minds. Others said it showed that some children were super predators, too dangerous to be treated as kids. Eric's mother, Arnetha Douglas, lived with grief and anger. She spoke often about how unfair it was that her son's killers would one day walk free, while Eric would never grow up. For her, justice seemed impossible. As for Jesse and Tykeece, they served their juvenile sentences and were released in the 2000s. But freedom did not bring redemption. Reports later showed that both boys continued to struggle with crime as adults. Jesse Rankins, in particular, returned to prison multiple times for new offenses. It seemed that the cycle of violence had never been broken. The murder of Eric Morse left a lasting mark on Chicago. It was used as an example of why the city needed stronger youth programs, better housing, and more protection for children growing up in dangerous areas. At the same time, it left people wondering if some children could ever be saved from the influence of violence around them. Today, the story is remembered not just for its cruelty, but for its age. Two boys, just 10 and 11, ended the life of a 5-year-old because he wouldn't help them steal candy. The image of Eric falling from that high-rise window still haunts Chicago's memory. The case of Jesse Rankins and Tykeece Johnson is one of the clearest examples of innocence destroyed, not only in the life that was taken, but also in the lives of the children who became killers before they even reached middle school. Number 3. Robert "Yummy" Sandifer. In 1994, the city of Chicago was stunned by the story of Robert "Yummy" Sandifer. He was only 11 years old, but he was already feared on the streets. His life became a tragic symbol of how gangs, poverty, and violence could turn a child into both a killer and a victim. Robert Sandifer, nicknamed Yummy because of his love for cookies and candy, grew up in one of the toughest neighborhoods in Chicago's South Side. His childhood was marked by neglect and abuse. His mother was often absent, his father was in prison, and by the age of 8, he was already involved with gangs. Social workers had tried to place him in foster homes, but he kept running away. Instead, he found a sense of belonging in the Black Disciples gang. Despite being so young, Yummy quickly became known to police. By the age of 11, he had more than 20 arrests for car theft, burglary, and assault. Adults in the community described him as a small boy with a big reputation, someone who carried guns and acted without fear. The gang saw him as useful. Because of his age, if he was caught, the punishment would be lighter compared to older members. On August 28, 1994, Yummy committed the crime that would make his name infamous. He was ordered by gang leaders to shoot at rival gang members. Armed with a 9mm pistol, Yummy opened fire. But instead of hitting his intended targets, he struck 14-year-old Shaven Dean, an innocent girl standing nearby. She was hit in the head by a stray bullet and killed instantly. The murder shocked the city. Siobhan was a popular teenager who had done nothing wrong. Her family was devastated, and her death became national news. Reporters soon discovered that the killer was not an adult, but an 11-year-old boy. The question spread everywhere. How could someone so young be responsible for such a violent act? After the shooting, Yummy went into hiding. The police launched a citywide manhunt, while the media showed his small face on television screens across America. For days, Chicago was caught between anger and pity. Some saw Yummy as a heartless killer, while others saw him as a lost child who had been failed by the system. But Yummy's story did not end with his capture. He never made it to trial. Just 3 days after Shaven Dean's death, Yummy was killed himself. The very same gang that had used him decided he was now a liability. Police said 2 teenage gang members, ages 14 and 16, were ordered to silence him. They lured Yummy under a railroad viaduct, shot him in the back of the head, and left his small body in the dirt. The cycle of violence had swallowed him whole. One child had killed another, and then he himself was killed by children only a few years older. The story of Robert "Yummy" Sandifer became a symbol of Chicago's struggles in the 1990s. National magazines like Time ran his photo on the cover, calling him the short life and tragic death of Robert Sandifer. Politicians used his case to argue for tougher laws on gangs and juveniles. Community activists pointed to him as proof that children needed stronger protection from violence and neglect before they turned to crime. For Shaven Dean's family, the pain was permanent. Their daughter had been taken by a stray bullet, a victim of a boy too young to even fully understand what he had done. For Robert Sandifer, his life was a warning, a childhood with no love, no guidance, and no real chance to escape the streets. Today, people still remember the name Yummy. He is often mentioned in documentaries, books, and classrooms as an example of what happens when society abandons its children. He was 11 years old, carrying a gun bigger than his own hands, and in just a few days he managed to destroy 2 lives, Shaven's and his own. The story of Robert "Yummy" Sandifer is not just about crime. It is about a boy who never had a real chance to be a child. It is about a city that watched its youngest get pulled into gangs. And it is about the tragic truth that even a child can kill and be killed before ever reaching middle school. Number 4. Leopold and Loeb. In 1924, Chicago was home to one of the most shocking and notorious murders in American history. The killers were not poor kids from the streets or members of a gang. They were 2 wealthy young men from privileged families. Their names were Nathan Leopold Jr., age 19, and Richard Loeb, age 18. They believed they were smarter than everyone else. They believed they could commit the perfect crime. But what they did would leave a dark stain on Chicago's history forever. Leopold and Loeb grew up in rich Jewish families in Chicago's Kenwood neighborhood. Both were considered brilliant students. Leopold was a child prodigy with an interest in philosophy and law. Loeb was charming and social, but also obsessed with detective stories and crime. The two met as teenagers and developed an unusual friendship. Some described it as controlling, with Loeb often pushing the ideas and Leopold following along. Others said they both fed each other's arrogance. By 1924, they had decided to prove their superiority to the world. They wanted to commit a murder, not for money or revenge, but simply to show they could get away with it. It was an experiment in crime. Their plan was to kill a random boy, hide the body, and collect ransom money from the family, just to prove they were smarter than police. On May 21, 1924, they set their plan in motion. They lured Bobby Franks, a 14-year-old neighbor, into their car. Bobby was the son of a wealthy family who lived nearby. He was also Loeb's distant cousin. Bobby thought he was just going for a ride, but the 2 young men had already decided he would die. Inside the car, they hit him on the head with a chisel and then suffocated him. Bobby was killed within minutes. After the murder, Leopold and Loeb stuffed his body into a culvert near Wolf Lake. To make the crime look like a kidnapping, they sent ransom letters to Bobby's family, demanding money for his safe return. But their plan began to unravel almost immediately. Bobby's body was found the very next day, long before the ransom could be paid. Police quickly launched a massive investigation. At first, it seemed like a mystery, but Leopold and Loeb had made mistakes. Investigators found a pair of eyeglasses near the body. The unique frame design was traced directly to Nathan Leopold. That discovery cracked the case open. Soon, both Leopold and Loeb were arrested. Under interrogation, they confessed in detail. They admitted they killed Bobby not out of hate, but out of arrogance. They wanted the thrill of committing the perfect crime. The trial that followed was one of the most famous in U.S. history. It drew national attention, not only because of the brutal killing, but also because of the killers' backgrounds. People could not understand how 2 wealthy, educated young men with every advantage in life could turn into cold-blooded murderers. Their lawyer was Clarence Darrow, one of the most famous defense attorneys in America. He knew the evidence against them was overwhelming, so instead of claiming innocence, he argued to save them from the death penalty. Darrow gave a passionate speech about how Leopold and Loeb were just boys, products of environment, privilege, and misguided ideas. He said killing them would not bring Bobby back. In the end, the judge spared them from execution. Both were sentenced to life in prison, plus 99 years. Richard Loeb was killed in prison in 1936 during a fight with another inmate. Nathan Leopold spent more than 30 years behind bars before being released on parole in 1958. He moved to Puerto Rico, lived quietly, and died in 1971. The case of Leopold and Loeb left a lasting legacy. It showed that murder could come not only from desperation or gangs, but also from arrogance, privilege, and intellectual pride. Their crime was remembered as the thrill killing, a murder committed simply because two teenagers wanted to prove they were smarter than everyone else. Bobby Franks, the real victim, is often forgotten in the shadow of their names. He was just a 14-year-old boy with a bright future, killed because his cousin and his friend wanted an experiment in murder. Nearly a century later, the story of Leopold and Loeb is still told in books, movies, and documentaries. It remains one of the clearest examples of how intelligence without conscience can lead to horror. Two young men, with wealth, education, and every opportunity, threw it all away for a crime they thought was perfect. But in the end, they proved only that no one, not even teenagers who believed they were geniuses, can truly escape justice.